everyone. Welcome to Mom's Writers Club. I'm Jessica.
And I am Sarah.
Today we're going to talk about which choice of like first, second, or third person you write in, as well as tense, and kind of our thoughts on it. Between the two of us, we've pretty much covered them all, and we're just going to have a discussion and see where it goes. So this might be a little less organized or as organized as any of our episodes ever are. But first, we're going to do our new segment called the Mom Rant. Sarah, do you have one?
60-second mom rant. You should go ahead.
Oh, okay. I'm ready. Wait. Let me try. Okay, I'm ready. Cheap plastic crap, specifically party favors. My daughter has been to several parties, birthday parties. She's like in that segment where like there's a party every other weekend right now, and it's really fun and she has a great time, and I'm so grateful that we're invited, and I love that she gets to go and celebrate with her friends. But almost every party, they give out like a bag of cheap plastic crap. So first of all, the environmentalist in me is like, stop it, because it all ends up in a landfill. Like almost none of it's recyclable. And two, it's cheap plastic crap. So it gets home and it breaks within like a day. And you know what happens when a plastic, well, any toy breaks and you have a 4-year-old? They cry. And of course, they love this cheap plastic crap more than the expensive toys that are good for the environment. And anyway, please stop. I promise I won't send my kid home, your kid home, with plastic crap from my kid. So please stop sending my kid. You get what I'm saying. Rant over.
Yes,
How'd
I'm
I
with
do?
you. Nice. 59 seconds. Now let's talk about person and tense.
Yeah, we're going to start by just talking a little bit about narrative distance. Sarah, kick it off.
Okay,
I'm like, I don't know what to say.
there's probably a very academic description of what narrative distance means that I'm going to totally blow right now.
Let's
But
do it.
we are working writers, and we interpret things the way we do. So narrative distance being like, how close to your character are you as a narrator? How close in their head are you? Okay, so let's say we're in first person present, and I say, I pulled out, or I say, I pull out my gun, right? It's very immediate, right there, right in the present with the character. I pulled out my gun. We're a tiny bit further back because the character is narrating it from some point in the future. She pulls out her gun, has a little different kind of distance because we are not the character. We are there's a narrator in the character, right? And then she pulled out her gun, gives us even a little more distance because we are a narrator telling the story from some point in the future. And then when you get into third person, even there's degrees of narrative distance, just depending on the wording you use. But basically, it's like, how close in are you? And the closer in you get, I feel like the more access to the immediacy of the story and the immediacy of the character's experience and emotions, but the less perspective on what's more broadly happening you have. Whereas the more you back out, the more you lose that access to the immediacy of the character, but the more you're able to kind of depict what else is going on in the story, maybe even in other characters' heads or in other time periods or in other rooms in the mansion or whatever. So hopefully that makes sense.
I think you described that really well. And to clarify for anyone who didn't notice like the differences, she started out talking in first person present, and then went to first person past, and then third person present, and then third person past. Just in case you didn't pick up on that, because I actually had to think about it for a second. And I do think that that present point of view definitely gets you a lot more in the moment. The other way I've heard it described is kind of like a camera. Is that camera up close, like on that person's face, and you're really experiencing every emotion with them. But like the downside of that might be that you don't know what's going on with the other character unless your character is staring at them and describing it. Or is that camera zoomed way out and you can see everything that's going on in the room? I do feel like right now there's a tendency towards a closer perspective.
Definitely.
That's definitely what I write and what I prefer. But I think it actually was, tell me if I'm wrong here, but like books in the 1800s were much more likely to be way more zoomed out.
Practically everything written before like I don't know. Again, there's some academic out there who knows this very well, but practically everything that was written before about 1920 was written in what is sort of broadly called omniscient narrator, past tense, third person, very broad access to everything and everyone's thoughts and everyone's head and everything that was going on in the entire world of that novel.
Yeah, but now that's pretty rare. In fact,
That's
I can
pretty
only think of a
rare.
couple. Like
Yeah.
I'm reading a book by, and I apologize to her if I'm saying her last name wrong, Sherry LaPena. She writes third person, and it's kind of this interesting combination of being close because it is one character at a time, but it's also omniscient and that you get every character's perspective at some point
Mm.
that you could ever want. And then the other person I was just thinking of, although I think it might be in first person, that book you and I were talking about, Sarah,
Which
everybody
one?
in my family has killed someone or
Oh,
something
yeah.
like that.
That's first person.
It's first person, but it felt very pulled back because he
Well,
doesn't talk about himself very much.
he does this very interesting thing as a narrator where the narrator, the the narrator of the book is its own character. He puts that
And
narrator
he's in the book,
on the page
but
talking about his own experience in the past. Only the person who is narrating the story to you is a very, very clear character, and he's addressing you
yeah.
as the reader in the second person. He's talking about how he's structuring this story and what's kind of going to
Yeah.
happen, and
It's very
he has this like
interesting.
very wry sort of funny way of doing it. So in a way, we're completely in his head as he's telling us the story about this thing that happened to him in the
Mm-hmm.
past, which is very, and he
It's
does it
kind of an interesting
very
study.
cleverly, and it's very cool the way he does it. I mean,
Yeah.
it would be a hard thing to pull off because um, it's such a striking choice, but he does a great job. So we're going to get into person and tense. So person being
Yeah.
first person I, so like I did this, second person you did such and such, third person he, she, they did such and such, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we're calling person. And then tense, which is present tense uh, and past tense. So you kind of have what? Does that, I can't do the math. You have 6 different choices here. First person,
Well, I
present, first
remember
person,
from my high
past,
school
second
English that
person,
you could do 3 times
present.
2 times 1. So yes.
Yeah, yeah, 6. Okay. All right. Yay, high school English. All right. So let's start with first person. When you are I. So we
Yes,
both write
I
in
love,
first person a lot,
yeah,
maybe
I
mostly.
love first person.
Yeah,
Almost
I
all
do
my
too.
favorite authors also write in first person. I like that immediacy. I actually did not write in third person for the longest time. And then the second book I ever tried writing, like the whole thing was in second person and did horribly in querying. So
Second
then I was
person?
afraid. I'm sorry, was in third person.
Third person. Yeah.
And my second book was in third person and it did horribly in the query trenches. So I was like always afraid to write it again, but I've started writing third person again and I'm starting to like it more. But first person is just a very comfortable place for me. And I think one of the biggest concerns and issues that people have and that I've seen and that I have sometimes too is making your character's voice from one book to the next or one character to the next if you have 2 characters both in first person is making them unique because it's
Yeah.
very easy to write kind of in your own voice, but
Yeah.
you have to adjust that to be your character. And that's one of the biggest issues I have had. So I have really focused on like some of my characters might be more shy or more bold or more sarcastic or funny in the way they think, or those are some of the things I've done. What do you
Yeah.
think about first person?
So I also love the immediacy of first person. My
Mm-hmm.
first book was first person, present tense, which is like and I was like it was like as immediate as you get. And I loved that. I
Yes,
had total
it's the
access
best.
to everything that was happening in this character's mind and body at any given moment. And it was so great. I mean, it was just so much fun. Then my second book is in first person past tense, and it was really weird shifting from the one to the other, because you get so into the techniques of one. But I felt like I needed a little more distance on her, and I needed that little bit of sense of reflection because she was a very different character, and that sort of helped me make it a different voice. And now I'm back to first person present, at least tentatively, because I started in first person
Mm-hmm.
present. I wrote like 20,000 words. I decided it should be in first person past. I got up to about 50,000 words. Then I decided it should be a whole different story and that it should be back in first person present. And now I'm back at like 8,000 words. So that's just how I roll. Do not recommend.
Make Me Disappear was the first book that I wrote in first person present, and I will agree with Sarah on the immediacy. I found it a little bit intimidating to do that combination, but it worked out really well. So if you are thinking about it, I would suggest trying it. I don't think it's right for every book, but especially for like thrillers and suspense type novels, or even, Sarah writes like book club / women's fiction, and what's going on in her first book is so like kind of thrilling. It works really well when you like have that energy. I don't know that I would write historical fiction that way, but at the same time, if you're doing it in like first person present, I could see it adding a lot of, immediacy and energy to it. So
Yeah.
that's when I think kind of about writing in first person present.
Yeah. And I would say use that immediacy. Like you're giving up a lot by being in first person in the first place.
Wait,
You're
what do you think you're giving up? I'm curious what you think, what your perspective on that is.
when you're in first person, you can't see anything that your character doesn't see unless you're
Yeah,
doing multiple points of view.
which you
If
should
your
do.
character isn't in the room, if your character isn't hearing it, if your character isn't seeing it, it can't be in the book because you're in first person, including how your character looks, and like where
And
your
don't stick
character.
them in front of a mirror in
Oh,
chapter one.
please
Don't
don't.
do
No,
it.
no, no, no,
I
no,
will
no.
laugh.
But it makes it
I'll
tricky
judge you.
because people do want to know what your character looks like, and so you got to work that in. But like where your character is in space, where they are in a room, what's behind them that they can't see. You give that all up. You've got only what your character can see. And so I feel like you need to like dig in to that access you have to the interior of your character. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. Yes. And what I will add is like maybe your character can't see what's behind them, but they hear something behind them,
Right,
which
right.
is great because then it's like super creepy, but the
Yeah,
reader
yeah, yeah.
doesn't know what it is. Like
Totally.
it might be limiting in a way, but it can also be really good in a
Well,
way.
like,
Like so if you can't see what's behind you, but you hear somebody creeping up behind you, like
yes. Right.
okay.
So I think they all have limitations and benefits. I think each choice, like you can't get this, but you can get that. So I think with first person, the real bonus using that point of view is the access to the interior of the character and what they are
Yeah.
thinking and feeling. And like just go bananas with that. I just took a really great online workshop with Donald Moss through the Women's Fiction Writers Association. It was really good. And he is all about like do not be small. Like put the big feelings on the page. Let your characters have the big feelings, put them on the page for the reader and you will nowhere get better access to those feelings than in first person, particularly present. But one thing I've noticed just recently with first person present is that if you're in the present tense, you can almost only be linear in terms of what's happening, you know?
That's why you need two timelines.
But like, for example, she said, I'm reading this really great craft book. Hang on. I just started reading this very interesting craft
What
book.
is it?
It
Let's
is
see.
called,
Let's see.
it is,
I can't see.
it's shiny. It's called Meander, Spiral, Explode. And it's actually
Who's it
written
by?
by Jane Allison, who teaches at the UVA creative writing program, which is right in Charlottesville, where I live.
Sarah, I have a request, a friendship
Yeah.
request. That in the future, every time you find a new craft book, you tell me about it.
I literally got it from Amazon like an hour ago. So
Uh-huh.
I
Well, that's
wasn't
an
holding.
hour too late then.
I wasn't holding out on you. I was looking for something kind of like,
And when did you order it?
oh yeah, a few days ago. Because I was looking for
Will you send me
something
a
a
photo
little
later?
different, like that was a little different than what I've been reading. And this is kind of like a very kind of literary, academic.
Oh, it's
She's like,
literary.
she's challenging the idea that a story has to be an arc, that a story can follow other patterns in nature, spirals, meanders, explosions.
I do think it can,
Yeah.
but that's probably not the book for me. I forgive you.
It's really, it's so far, it's really interesting. Anyway, how did I get to that? Oh, she was talking, she was talking about like how, structuring a particular sentence, and something about it was only after he had lain around in bed half the morning that he thought about looking out the window and what might happen if he went out that day. And you can't do that in first person present. You can't be like, it
That's
is
true.
only after I laid around in bed. You're like, I am laying in bed. It is now half the morning. I don't know how to explain it, but you're sort of bound to a very linear
Yeah,
way of, and I'm not talking about flashback
kind
or
of.
backstory or anything.
I wish I could like have that on a piece of paper because I would sit here
Yeah.
and mess with it and try to make it, because I feel like I'm actually able to do a lot of thinking in my character's head in present point of view.
Oh yeah.
That does not always, I mean, she thinks about the past a lot, but I can see what you mean. But now I'm like, I feel like I've been
No, it's
challenged to
not
like
about the past.
figure it
It's not
out.
about anything that happened in the past.
No,
It's
I
about what's
know.
happening right now, and you're kind of bound to this linear experience of time in the present.
So I grew up hearing you cannot write a book in second person unless it's like a choose your own adventure. And back then it was like, first you walk down the hall and then you can turn left or right, and you would have to pick left or right. But second person is being done in a very different way now. And the way I have seen it done is not typically that the narrator is talking to the reader, although this book we were just talking about is exactly that, but that it's actually the main character talking to someone else. And this is most
Yeah.
probably classically known as in the book You, that has been turned into a Netflix show. And he's constantly talking to someone, although I'm thinking of these more recent books. He's usually talking to his love interest. I wrote Daniel and Make Me Disappear in second person. And although I would argue it's actually first person and he's talking to
Yeah,
someone because he
it
is
is.
in his own head. He is saying
Yeah.
and I do this, but then is also kind of addressing an outside person. But
Second
it's kind of
person,
second person.
second person is kind of always, I mean, I'm sure there's exceptions, but kind of always both. You know, it's a first person
Yeah.
speaker who is addressing either the reader or someone else. Unless you have
I will
like a
also
purely
say,
like invisible narrator who is talking to the reader, then
yes,
otherwise you've kind of
I
got
will
an
say
I that is speaking to you, you know.
this perspective often comes off a little bit creepy in my opinion. Uh, I am sure it can be done
Which
not
is
in a creepy
good.
way.
Yeah.
Yes, but I'm usually going for creepy. So I'm thinking of like You. I'm thinking of Make Me Disappear with Daniel. Sarah Pekkanen and Vera Hendricks did one very kind of predatory character using this voice. I think, and I know I've seen it in many other books. It's kind of having a little mini boom right now, and it's
Hmm.
lots of fun to write in. I was a little not sure about doing it, but Daniel's voice came out that way. And I say go for it if you want to try it. Like it was my like big risk for Make Me Disappear, and my agent
Yeah.
ended up loving it.
Let's take a moment to, because
Uh-huh.
I see questions on Twitter fairly often about what
Yeah.
do people think of first person present? You know, I heard that agents don't like it, or I hear that, you know, drives
Yeah.
readers crazy, or what do you think about third person present? There sort of questions addressing, if I write in this, if I make this narrative choice, how is it gonna affect me? Are people gonna like it? Are agents gonna like it? Or, you know, what are your thoughts on that?
I have a lot of thoughts. I've heard many people say that, oh, I don't like first person, or oh, I don't like third person, although I most often hear it said about first person.
Yeah.
And I don't really understand where it comes from personally, because probably because growing up, half the books I read were in first person. I think there's always going to be someone who dislikes everything, so I don't worry too much about it. I also feel like the story and what you need, at least for thrillers, what you need to be able to keep from the reader may inform what point of view that you are in.
Hmm.
I will say I have yet to find a story I connect with that is third person present. It always just
Mm.
comes off a little weird to me, but
That's
I
one I
know
struggle
that a
with. Yeah.
book will, yeah, I know though that a book will come out and I won't even realize it's in third person
Yeah.
present because it will be done so well. I
Right.
will say I generally prefer first person. but there have been a few books where I will like go to discuss it with someone or with Sarah, and I'm like, yeah, that was in first person.
And
And
it
Sarah
was
will
in
be like,
third.
that was in third person. But it was
Right.
done so well and it was so
Right.
close. My thing is,
Right.
I really want to know what's going on in the character's head. The more distant narrative doesn't usually work for me. So I don't know. I say do what's right for you. I got some pushback from one beta reader on the second person, but if you watched one of our previous episodes where we interviewed my agent Kimberly, she said that's when she knew that she was going to offer.
Right.
And for some agents, it did not work at all. So
Mhm.
do what works for you and for the book.
Yeah.
I think there's always going to be that subjective opinion.
Yeah.
What do you think?
So I think the book You is kind of a case in point that somebody took a big risk. They wrote this book in
Mm-hmm.
second person, and it was like, and they really hit it. They really got it right.
But they dug in and fully committed, and
Totally
like
committed.
they did
Yep.
that thing they were going to do 110%. And
Yeah.
now they have a
And
Netflix deal.
they probably worked very hard on their technique. It was probably
Yeah.
uncomfortable at first. They probably fucked it up on several drafts until they got it right. You know, I think
Yeah.
the whole like I don't like first person, I don't like third person thing is really like 50-50. Like,
Then don't read my book.
I think if you like first person, write in first person. If you like third, write in third, whatever. It's not gonna change
Yeah.
anything.
I also think that some people are naturally better at one than the other, and there's nothing wrong. I think we like it because we're good at it.
Yeah.
Like we
Mhm.
tend to not like what we're not as good at. I didn't feel like I was good at third person, so I didn't like writing in third person. Like dig in. Like if that's what you
Yeah.
do well, then do it really
Yeah.
fucking well. And
And
there's nothing wrong with that.
I think there's power in doing the thing you want to do. You know, if you
Yes,
want to
exactly.
write something in first person present, I feel like that's like a little turbo boost for whatever you're going to write because you want to write it. That is how you want to do it. I think there's power in that. And I think that agents like good stories told well. And
Yes, I
it's
agree.
not about person or tense. They might even say, "Oh, don't send me first person present." But then they might like pick some book that's really fucking awesome that they didn't even know that they would fall in love with. So, yeah. Okay, moving on.
All right.
Are we done
Third
with second person?
person.
Okay.
We're done with second person. So we're going to talk about third person. And I mean, I think this is one of those things that is definitely on a spectrum. So close versus distant third person. There's a lot of talk these days about like writing in close third. To the point where I was like, is this a different version of third person than I've heard of? Because I had suddenly started hearing so much about it. And the idea of close third is that you're right in that character's head. It's basically writing first person, except you're using third person pronouns. And I've actually heard the advice, try writing a paragraph in first person and then switch it around so that it's in third person. And that is third person close, where you're
Mm-hmm.
really in their head. You're not ever in somebody else's head. The thing I struggle with talking about third person omniscient, where you're zoomed out, is that there's third person omniscient. I always feel like I say that word wrong. But then there's also the idea of like head hopping. And
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't mean that you should be in everybody's different head in every different chapter, although some authors do it and get away with it. I mentioned her earlier. Sherry LaPena does third person. And at times you really feel like you're in a character's head. But the reality is that she's zoomed out pretty far, and every
Mm-hmm.
chapter is in a different character's point of view. I think her newest book has like 7 points of view so far, and I'm only halfway through it. That is very different than third person close, where you're following, not that you can't follow more than one character, but if you're following one main character and you're like right there in
Mm-hmm.
her head. What do you think, Sarah?
Okay, so I think what you gain with third person is the ability to be somewhere else besides in your character's head. I think a lot of people like to read and a lot of people like to write very close inside someone's head, so they really have access to their feelings and their experiences, and it's like this very visceral experience. And I think when it's done well, like when you're talking about the way Sherry LaPena wrote that book, the author is able to kind of like zoom out and in a little bit without it
Mm-hmm.
being jarring. Like for example, if you're
Yes.
describing a landscape, if you're describing a house on a lake in first person, you're filtering it all through that character's experience and emotions and the way they talk and their voice. But if you're in third person and you want to describe this house on a lake where maybe your story is set, you have a little more room to just like set the tone and set the vibe for the book
Mm-hmm.
as the narrator without having to be in your character's head and voice, right? And then you can like
Yeah.
maybe zoom into the house on the lake and into the character and get inside their head. And that's the beauty of third person, is that you can do
That's a
that,
great way
like
to put it.
moving in and out. And the whole head hopping thing is kind of interesting. So head hopping is when you're in third person and you're in one person's experience, and then all of a sudden you are experiencing the thoughts of another character, like the interior thoughts
Yeah.
and feelings of another character, and then another character, and you're like the narrator or the reader is like bouncing between different interior experiences.
It's
I
very
think it's,
jarring.
yeah, partly because that's not what we're used to, and partly because it's not done
Mm-hmm.
well. If you go back and you read Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, it's all head hopping. It's all over the place.
Yeah.
She is in
Is it
everybody's
done
head.
well though?
It is done
Does it feel
beautifully.
okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting, there's a craft book I read somewhere that talks not about consistency of point of view, but consistency of story. And what she does is she follows the head where the story is happening,
Oh, interesting.
and it's really interesting the way she does it. She moves between like the main character Lizzie Bennet to Mr. Darcy, who's like the love interest, and like it'll move to his head, but he's still thinking about her and about the issues around his feelings about her, and then she'll move to somebody else's head, but it's still following the same story, which are like her issues, her complications, her relationships to her environment. Only you're getting it from different heads, but the consistency of the story thread is so strong that like, but some people go back and they read those old novels and they're like, I just don't like that kind of thing. It doesn't work for me. And that's part
Yeah.
of it, is that they do that a lot because they use this omniscient narrator, and some people find it weird.
Have you read any books from the last 20 years that were written that way? Because I can't think of a single one
Yes,
that I
I
have.
have. Richard Russo's Everybody's Fool is a
Okay.
very interesting take on like an omniscient narrator. And I'm trying to remember, he may sort of change chapter to chapter. Like people change point of view. Point of view is this very mushy term that like means a lot of different things. But like people will often change point of view chapter by chapter, right? Like you did that and Make Me
Yeah, that's
Disappear.
what I
You
do.
had Daniel chapters and you had Noel chapters, and a
You
lot of people
don't
do
want
that.
your reader to be confused. That's what it
Right.
comes down to. Like if you're going to
Right.
have multiple points of view, I've read many books where they are not marked chapter by
Hmm.
chapter. And for some people, you can get away with that. With that book, I probably could have gotten away with it because they're so different. But
Hmm.
I've also read ones where they're not marked and it takes me a while
Right.
to figure it
Like
out.
the chapters aren't labeled with the name of the
Yeah.
person whose point of view
So
we're in.
I
And I
suggest
don't
labeling
think
them.
I don't think Richard Russo does that in this book, and it totally
Mhm.
works. It's a
Yeah.
great book. 100% works, and it's really interesting to like go to that book and see how he does it. It's really cool.
I think most books will not do well in third person omniscient. I know that there will always be exceptions. So if you're the exception, by all means, go for it. But
Yeah.
for the most part, what is being published right now, if you're looking into, well, honestly, traditional or self-publishing, really is first person or third person close.
Hmm. Yeah.
And there are a lot of really great resources out there for how to improve. Honestly, one of my favorite things to do is just to read a book that's been done really well in it
Yeah.
and study how that writer has done it, because I didn't study how to do either one of them. It was just through reading over time that, I got comfortable with both of them. So our next topic is multiple point of view and tense. And this is something I feel like we're seeing more and more of. Like it's actually pretty commonplace now. And I feel like what I was reading, 20 years ago. And although maybe it's because of genre, I like never read multiple point of view, and I rarely read multiple tenses within a single book. In the thriller genre, anyway, it's actually kind of becoming the norm. I notice it when I only have a single point of view or a single timeline or tense because
Right.
it's pretty uncommon now, it seems like. So the book I'm writing right now, one point of view, and so I'm writing first person present for the main point of view, and I'm writing third person past for the other like point of view timeline. And my biggest advice is to have a reason you're doing it
Hmm.
that way,
Yeah.
like, and it's past tense because it happened in the past, and it's third person because I wanted a little more distance from my characters. I'm looking back at what happened in the past, although it could have been written in first person and it would have been just fine as well. I really like first person present for thrillers because it like puts you so much in the moment. Um, and I usually use past point of view for my past chapters. As far as multiple point of view, the biggest thing is having a different voice. I do find that
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
changing the person, like the POV first versus third, or past versus present, or both, helps me a lot to establish a
Yeah.
different voice. I
Yeah.
feel like getting outside. So my book 3, the second point of view is a male character, and I write him in third, and he sounds completely different because he's
Yeah.
in third person, and I
Yeah.
can like pull back a little bit. And that helped me a lot to differentiate them. So that is one great way to make them sound a little bit different. It's not cheating, but it almost feels like cheating because it makes it a lot easier, at least for me.
It's all
Sarah, you have
cheating.
thoughts?
Writing is all
I
cheating. Yeah, actually, read Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones was
know.
not my jam. I read like the first.
I was gonna say, I don't want to. I
No, no,
mean, I
no, no,
know it's
no.
great, but I don't want to.
No,
It's not my
it
genre at
was not
all.
my jam. And not because it's not my genre or I don't think it's a great book, but like I got to the death of the first major character and I was like, oh fuck. And my husband had read the
Mm.
whole thing and he was like, yeah, it's all like that. Even up to the end, it doesn't even really end. And I was like, yeah, fuck this. I'm not finishing this. But he does an amazing job going from character to character, chapter by chapter, and having completely different voice for each one. Like they are so
Yeah.
identifiably different. And it just gives you a whole feeling for the way that you're experiencing that chapter through that character, even though it's in third person. That was like a big light bulb for me going and reading that for that reason.
One other thing I sometimes do is I'm not someone who usually is like, this character is based off of this character in a TV show or a movie, but sometimes I don't base characters off of people, but sometimes I'm kind of like, they might have a voice similar to this
Right.
person or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And when you have multi-point of view and you're trying to differentiate, kind of, I like hear the voice of a character in my head, like from a TV show. So it's not
Mm-hmm.
them, but hearing that voice and just hearing a different pitch and tone, like their
Right.
literal
Right.
voice,
Mm-hmm.
can really help me differentiate how they talk
Oh,
sometimes.
that's
And
cool.
then
Yeah.
that is, and not just like their dialogue, but how they talk in their head.
Yeah.
I think that's everything on this. Do you have any other thoughts on
I don't
tense or
because I have never
person?
written multi point of view at all. I may someday. I don't know.
Next time.
I get like
Okay, let me grab a
so
question.
deep in the one character that it just can't get out.
Oh, this is funny because we just recorded this episode. Cassandra asks, I'd love any thoughts on POV, how to choose best ways to make first person sound less I, and how to make third person
Oh,
closer.
oh yeah, yeah.
Well, for third person closer, I would say try writing it and first point of view and then
Hmm.
changing it and realize
Hmm.
that you can get that close. And then Sarah, can you talk a little bit? I think it's called direct thought. This
Yeah,
was
yeah,
like game changer for me. Can
yeah.
you describe it for someone
Um,
who's never heard of it before?
yeah. So it's called free indirect speech. Free indirect speech. Look it
Yes.
up on Google. It
Look
will
that up.
explain. It will have a really nice, concise explanation that I will not be able to do justice to right now. But it's basically a moment where you're in third person, but you are speaking as the character. Yeah.
Emily walked into the room. Wow, it was so bright in there.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
she's thinking that, like she walked into the room, but then you're getting that inner thought of like, wow, it is so bright in here. But it's not in first
Right.
person. It's just you're
Right.
getting that
And it's
immediate
kind of
thought.
like
Get rid of
there's
those
no
filter words
filter
like he thought.
phrases. Yeah. Yeah. So take out so look up free indirect speech. I'm sort of not doing it justice right now. And take out the filter phrases like he thought, he heard, he saw, he felt, he smelled.
When you go back and revise your third person, you will start to pick up on the places where you can get rid of those filter phrases. And I'm very aware of it. And I still have to, and I do this in first person too. It doesn't need to be I think or I Well, that's a whole different topic, getting into filter phrases. But if you remove those in third person, it will help a lot.
Right.
As
Like
far as, go ahead.
he smelled the acrid smoke as it billowed into the room. You can just say
Yeah.
acrid smoke billowed into the room, you know?
Yeah. It will make it feel much more immediate and in that character's head.
Okay, so
Yes.
the whole thing about I in first person. Okay, first of all, don't worry about it on your first draft.
Yeah. And
Just
go
don't worry
look at
about it.
another book that's written in first point of view. You'll realize that it doesn't feel like they're doing that, and you're probably doing
Yeah,
the same
you
thing.
know, I think it seems like a thing that people worry about a lot right now, but I do think I is a little bit like said, where it becomes kind of invisible. There are ways that you can, so when you go back to revise, if so you don't, you know, first draft, just don't worry about it. Be in your character's head, write the story. But when you revise, you can rearrange your sentences so you're not starting them with I. You can put a clause like when the door opens, I blah, 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 rather than I blah, blah, blah when the door opens. So don't start the sentence with I, and that
Yeah.
will help a lot. Keep an eye on your paragraphs so that you're not starting every paragraph with I. And it can actually be a really powerful thing to, there are places where you can totally restructure the sentence or the way your character is experiencing something to remove the I altogether. And that can sometimes yield really good writing. It's tricky though.
So, kind of coattailing on that, this is actually often for me a filter word issue again, because you're saying I searched the darkness
Oh yeah.
to see what was there. Instead, the darkness, you walk in the room and there's darkness. It doesn't have to be like I heard, I
Right,
saw.
right.
Like, get rid of those filter words and put that character directly in that experience. Yeah, instead of saying I saw the moon through the darkness, the moon rose through the darkness. That often
Right.
involves giving something else a verb, but
Yeah,
that's
which is a
okay.
good thing.
So
Yeah.
that for me was actually the biggest problem I realized that I was doing. So that should help. But again, also look at a first person book, and I suspect that you will realize you're not actually doing it any more than that
Yeah.
published book is. I really worried about that initially, and now I'm super paranoid of every time I'm saying I.
Yeah.
But it's fine. You'll figure it out.
Yeah. And you
I
can
hope
pare
that
them
helps.
down a little bit from your first draft, and then I don't know, don't worry about it that much.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. That's everything we have to say on this particular topic, but let us know if you have any questions or if you have any episodes you'd like us to do. We're always
Oh,
looking for
hey,
great new ideas. Yeah.
I forgot this last time. I got my writer tattoo.
Oh, yeah.
I want to
Sarah
show
got a new
everybody. Let's see if I
tattoo.
can let's see if I
Tell
can
us
do
about
this.
it.
Okay, so this is, can we see here? This is my
Yep,
chair.
I see it.
This is my old timey chair.
And what does that chair mean?
Right? And then there's like all these like beautiful flowers. It's going to be wild rose. It's going to be slightly colored, not bright, but like almost like an antique kind of colors. And then there's lily of the
It's
valley,
beautiful.
the top, and my little chair. And the idea being that you put your butt in the chair and you do
And right.
the work. And that is the
Yes.
only way that you are going to create the beautiful thing. You know, you are not going to do it by thinking about it. You are not going to do it by agonizing about it or crying about it or telling your friends about it. The only way you're going to do it is by putting your butt in the chair and doing the work.
But you can agonize and cry a little bit. It helps
Oh, of course,
sometimes.
of course. But the
But
only
then go
way
get
the
in the
work
chair.
is going to get written is by, and it doesn't have to be a chair. People have standing desks. It's cool. It's a metaphor. So anyways, that's the reminder to me, is when I'm agonizing about something, just put my butt in the chair and do the work. It's not that complicated.
All right. So
Okay.
we now expect you to go put your butt in the chair and do your writing for the day, and we will see you next time.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.